Hi, welcome to Kenduck's Classroom. And in this edition of Kenduck's Classroom, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to teach you about the Articles of Confederation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over both the strengths of the Articles of Confederation and the weaknesses as well. So I'll refer to the positive parts of the Articles of Confederation government as the pros, and the negatives of the Articles of Confederation government as cons. So first, just two very important pieces of information for you to know about the Articles of Confederation. First is that this was the document that gave structure to the U.S. government from when the Second Continental Congress met during the Revolutionary War up until 1789. So this is the first constitution that the U.S. ever had. Now, the second most important concept before we start is you need to understand that with this government, the 13 state governments actually had a lot more power than the national government or the central government or the federal government. So, of course, the colonials were revolting against the British, and they saw Parliament and the king as kind of a monster, and they didn't want to create a new monster with their new government. And so in order to protect against that, they created a national government that was pretty weak, and instead the 13 state governments had the more robust government. Okay, so let's first go on and talk about the negative components of the Articles of Confederation. So one of the first negatives is that there was no executive. So believe it or not, there was no President of the United States. There was no executive branch. And this was a weakness mostly because if there was an issue with a foreign nation, you didn't have a president who was kind of like the key diplomat, who was able to communicate an idea and try to make an agreement or a treaty with another country. And so, for example, we had a territorial dispute with Spain, and it was bad because Spain wouldn't let us drop goods off at New Orleans, which is a key port to get to trade goods to the Caribbean. And so it really hurt that we didn't have one person, a president, an executive, who could kind of communicate the U.S.'s position in dealing with these foreign and domestic issues as well. The second negative with the Articles of Confederation government was the fact that there was no judicial branch of government. So there were no judges. There was no Supreme Court, no lesser federal courts like district courts or circuit appeals courts that we have today. Any issue that had to do with courts was just dealt with at the state level. So that's another one of the negatives. So at the end of the day, there is only one branch of government. There's a legislative branch of government. Now, some of the problems with the legislative branch of government, of course, is that each state only got one vote when it came to passing a law in the Articles of Confederation government. So even though each state could send several delegates to the Articles of Confederation legislature, the small states had as much power as the large states because, like I just said, each state only had one vote. And that really upset the large states because their populations, like the populations of Virginia, New York, Pennsylvania, was so much larger than Rhode Island or New Jersey. And unfortunately, a lot of delegates and people in the states just didn't think the national government was really that worth it, or they're certainly not powerful, as they didn't have the voice that they believed that they should have. So another issue, another negative with the Articles of Confederation government is that there was no power to collect taxes. So if you're taking notes, if you're watching this, highlight this, underline this, asterisk this, whatever you got to do, but please know that the Articles of Confederation government did not allow for any tax collection. And why is this bad? Well, this is bad because during the course of the Revolutionary War, the U.S. government was obviously going into debt. And how would you ever be able to pay off your debt, pay your soldiers, your other financial commitments, if you couldn't collect any taxes? Now, if you think about it, it kind of makes sense as to why they didn't want to give the national government the power to collect taxes. In the not too distant kind of memory of the colonials is Parliament passing all those different laws. The Sugar Act, the Tea Act, and even though some of those were lessened or repealed, the colonials did not want to create a new monster with their central government. Now, another weakness is in the Articles of Confederation government is that there was no control of interstate commerce or trade. So the national government could not control trade, either with other countries or from state to state. And you may be saying, well, why was this bad? Well, this was bad because states were doing things like taxing one another with trade tariffs. And these taxes are bad because anytime there's a tax, that's going to kind of put up a wall. That's going to make it more difficult to trade because who wants to pay taxes? No one really wants to pay more taxes. So it hurt that the national government in the Articles of Confederation was not able to control interstate trade and commerce. Just some other issues that also existed with the Articles of Confederation government was there was really, really poor attendance at the Articles of Confederation government for some of the reasons that we described before. Now, the final weakness to the Articles of Confederation government is that it was almost impossible to change or amend the Articles of Confederation Constitution. In order for there to be some type of an amendment, it had to be unanimous. The delegates from all 13 states had to agree to alter the document. And so think about it. What are the odds that you and 12 people you know all want to do the exact same thing at the exact same time? Probably pretty slim, right? And so it was almost impossible to amend the Articles of Confederation Constitution. And that's why at the end of the day, at the Constitutional Convention in 1787, the delegates from the different states meet in Philadelphia and they realize that the Articles of Confederation is just not a workable document, partly because it's really difficult to amend. Okay, now let's talk about some of the positives. Believe it or not, there were some positives to the Articles of Confederation government. One of the positives is that it did keep the states together. There were a whole bunch of issues. For example, there were territorial disputes. After the Treaty of Paris was signed, different states were claiming land out to the northwest, land that today is Indiana, Wisconsin, Ohio. States like New York and Virginia, Pennsylvania, they were claiming that as their territory. But actually, what the Articles of Confederation government was able to do was pass two laws that actually kind of helped get over this conflict between the different states. The first law was the Land Ordinance of 1785. And basically, in a nutshell, what this law did was it said none of those states that were claiming that territory in the Northwest could get that land. The national government was going to collect that land. And that was good because the national government could sell the land, make some money. We know they're trying to collect money because there's no tax collection. So that Land Ordinance of 1785 was actually a really good law, one of the very few good laws that was passed under the Articles of Confederation government. Another kind of notable characteristic in the Land Ordinance of 1785 is that the land was kind of split up 6 miles by 6 miles, and a certain block of land was dedicated to building schools and reserved for education. Now, a second land ordinance that was passed a couple of years later, the Northwest Land Ordinance of 1787, is also a very important law because now this land that the national government controls needs to be organized into new territory and, of course, new states as well. And so this Northwest Land Ordinance of 1787 is good because it lays out a process. The national government would kind of appoint a governor and some judges, and once there were a certain amount of residents in each territory in the Northwest Territories, they would vote and create a legislator, and then once they had 60,000 voting residents, they could then ask to kind of become a state. And so Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Ohio, these are some of the states that were part of this territory that eventually became new states. And of course, the final positive, I guess, of the Articles of Confederation government is that it did help us kind of get through the Revolutionary War. And that's a big deal. Think about it. The men at the different the different conventions during the course of the Revolutionary War had to organize a government and execute a war at the same time. And they were able to do that under the Articles of Confederation government. And of course, this government did allow John Adams, John Jay, and Benjamin Franklin to go to the Treaty of Paris and sign what would eventually become a really sweet deal at the end of the Revolutionary War, because it recognized American independence and we got very kind of generous land. So those are the positives. We discussed the negatives. One more time real quick. The negatives are there was no executive, no judicial branch of government in the Articles of Confederation government. There was no ability for the national federal government to collect taxes, and they also had no control of interstate commerce. Also, the document was impossible to amend. Those are the negatives. Here are the positives. It kept the states together. We were able to negotiate the Treaty of Paris, and there were those land ordinances that did help stop conflict between those territorial disputes between different states at the end of the Revolutionary War. So that's it. This is Mr. Kenduck signing off.